number of studies which show that if, let's say, GDP was to grow without any mitigation steadily, let's assume, this is the kind of shape of the curve that you would get. However, if we were to carry out stringent mitigation, then this line will just bend a little downwards. And what does this imply? Well, it just means that the extent of prosperity that the world will reach in 2030 would at best or at worst be postponed by a few months or the maximum of a year. And that certainly, as rational human beings, we would find is not a high price to pay for bringing about stability of the Earth's climate and minimizing or avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. The other point I'd like to make is all of this is accompanied by huge co-benefits. What are these co-benefits? Firstly, we would get much higher energy security. And the world certainly is facing an insecure energy future as a whole. We would get much higher employment. We would get much higher agricultural output. We would also get much lower levels of pollution at the local level, which carries enormous health benefits. So all of this put together, this 3%, less than 3% of the cost in terms of global GDP that may be lost by 2030 can be offset by all these benefits. So in other words, we're really talking about a win-win situation that I think we must recognize and seize with a sense of urgency. And I want to point out one important fact that we brought out in the fourth assessment report, that if you look at negative cost options, then by 2030, we would be in a position to exploit these opportunities to the extent of 6 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year of greenhouse gas emissions. So in other words, the world has these zero cost or negative cost opportunities, which I'm afraid policies that we have today are blocking. And therefore, I think the point that was made by Mr. Kent about a coalition between the Golden Triangle that he talked about, between government, industry, civil society and the public at large, is extremely important to bring about this shift. And I think our chairman rightly mentioned that the internet really has brought about a sea change in the way information and knowledge is spread. And I think we should use these media for bringing about awareness, bringing about understanding and knowledge in the field of climate change, where clearly, to the extent that human beings are affecting the Earth's climate, we must start doing something about it. Now, what I'd like to say is that all of this requires that we bring about change on the part of all these three stakeholders. Because the pace, the cost and extent of our response to climate change will depend critically on the cost, performance and availability of technologies. We need to provide signals to industry by which new technology will be developed. And I think this can be assisted enormously by effective carbon price signals in different parts of the world, regulations, standards, taxes and charges. But we also need changes in lifestyle. We have become accustomed to an enormous amount of waste. And I think, as you heard earlier, waste has been converted into useful material. And I think this can start with our own behavior, it can start with our own lifestyle changes. And in this country we know, for instance, through government initiative, light bulbs are being changed, we use much more efficient lighting technologies. We can start doing that in our own homes. And the investment needs in energy are going to be crucial, because 60 to 80% of greenhouse gas reductions would come from energy supply and use and industrial processes. And our initial estimates show that returning global energy-related CO2 emission levels to 2005 levels by 2030 would require a large shift in investment patterns, although the net additional investment requires ranges from negligible to 5 to 10%. So this is not a huge price to pay. And I want to mention that just a month ago we brought out a special report on renewable energy in the IPCC, and we examined 164 different scenarios of how renewable energy can make a difference. And interestingly, we found that at least in one of the scenarios, you may not regard that as terribly realistic, by 2050 the world could use about 77% of the total energy coming from renewable sources. Let me also talk about the impacts of climate change in industry, because mitigation is one part of the challenge. The second part of the challenge is how to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Now, companies can adapt to these potential impacts, such as extreme weather events, by designing more resistant facilities, relocating plants to less vulnerable locations. We know that, for instance, the mega deltas are by far the most vulnerable regions in the world. And this includes cities like Shanghai, Dhaka, Kolkata, and others. Industry is also vulnerable to changes in consumer preference and government regulation. We heard, for instance, that consumers are probably going to become much more exacting, not only in terms of the products and technologies that they are going to be buying, but also on the behavior of companies, and expecting companies to really put their money where their mouth is and practicing sustainability in every sense of the term. I also want to quickly highlight some of the areas of technology development. We know technologies currently available range from efficient end-use electrical equipment, heat and power recovery, control of non-CO2 gas emissions. We know, for instance, the Montreal Protocol has been extremely successful to specific technologies, but technologies that are projected to be commercialized before 2030, where we need to focus, and which also have enormous opportunities for growth and employment potential. Advanced energy efficiency, carbon capture and storage for a number of industries, inert electrodes for aluminium manufacture, and so on. We also know that if we look at mitigation technologies in energy supply, there are enormous opportunities. Improved supply and distribution efficiency, for instance, smart grids can make an enormous difference, and much is happening in that area, which gives us cause for optimism. Combined heat and power, early applications of carbon dioxide capture and storage, and of course CCS for gas, biomass and coal-fired electricity generating facilities, advanced nuclear power, advanced renewable energy, and so on. So where do we go from here? Well, in the case of buildings, for instance, you take a country like Mexico, so also in my own country, China, India and China, there are enormous opportunities for creating buildings that are energy efficient, and my own institute in New Delhi has been at the forefront of this effort. We have one particular training complex which uses no power from the grid, because we've integrated a whole range of design options, which incidentally is not a luxury because we're saving money on it. And I think this is a sector in which we can bring about major change. So finally, let me end by saying something that an extremely wise person, who was perhaps ahead of his time, stated when he was alive. And that is Mahatma Gandhi. This is a silhouette of his. He used more or less the same pair of glasses all his life. What he said, as a technological society has two choices. First, it can wait until the catastrophic failures expose systemic deficiencies, distortion and self-deceptions. Secondly, a culture can provide for social checks and balances to correct for systemic distortion prior to catastrophic failures. So I hope all of us will become adherents to the second culture, second philosophy. We really don't have to await disaster to overtake us. And I'm delighted that I've had this opportunity. I'm very grateful. I also want to mention the IPCC and ICC have at least 3 letters in common in their names, and I hope we can work together in the future. Thank you very much.
As you're walking back, you begin with a focus on the humanitarian need, the role that hurricanes